Okay, welcome to this third session here where we'll talk about crocodilians and turtles. And crocodilians, really, we're just talking about the American alligator. That is our only crocodilian, uh, unless you go to South Florida, where the American crocodile is still kind of hanging on down in South Florida. But the rest of the U.S., it's American alligators all the way. So I will say that we are co-sponsored now by friends of Sheri Capehart Nature Preserve, um, as well as the Crosstimbers Master Naturalist chapter. Thanks, Erica. Um, and hopefully I'm not sure how many of you are Master Naturalists, but hopefully it will be useful to that group. Let me go to the presentation and share screens. Okay, you should be looking at an alligator uh, sliding into the water from the bank. This was at Aransas National Wildlife Refuge. So we will talk about crocodilians and turtles. Let's see. So let's start with our alligator. The crocodilians, just as a group, are a really ancient lineage. They go back 215 million years ago. So that's back a little right at the edge of the dinosaurs. This is like very early, just early Triassic maybe. And the crocodilian group includes crocodiles, alligators, caimans, which are South American or lower uh, part of the New World, and gharials, which are Indian and South Asian critters, the ones with the really skinny, narrow um, jaws. Um, and among the things that kind of set them apart, other than being really big, osteoderms under the dorsal scales. If you look at that photo of the alligator, well, all of those scales have got little osteoderms, meaning little kind of bony bits underneath it, especially those raised ones that kind of keeled stuff down the back. And that gives them what amounts to kind of like studded leather armor. It's a pretty protective thing to have these bits of bone in each of the scales. Um, the as a group they have temperature dependent sex determination. So unlike us, where it's chromosomal, it's genetically determined, gender is um, the sexual characteristics. In crocodilians, it depends on the temperature at which the eggs are incubated, and higher temperatures result in males. You can get almost all males if the temp gets a little higher than normal, which, uh, as you can imagine, with climate change, that is a potential real problem. The nostrils and ears can close with a valve, and there's a flap at the back of the tongue that can close off the breathing passages from the mouth. So when underwater, alligator could be cruising along. It could open the mouth, or if they grab something and get the mouth open, they're not at risk of choking or drowning because that flap protects the airway. They're not going to get water in the nose. They don't even get water in the ears. Um, there's a nictitating membrane of the eye that will cover and protect the eye underwater so they can look through that membrane and have their eye protected but still see underwater. But when the water is really murky and you can't see much when it's like muddy, there are dermal pressure receptors on the scales around the face, and those detect movement so that if the gator is underwater and there's like a nutria swimming by, the gator should be able to sense that there's something moving nearby. I guess you could relate it a little bit to the lateral line on a fish, right? Where you get a sense of the pressure around you. And they have good hearing acuity. Um, I don't know. I have this tendency to want to say So, how many of you have heard an alligator bellow? And of course, you can't exactly answer me right now, but if you've hung out with alligators, you may have heard that males will use that for a couple of reasons, one of which is in courtship or to attract a female. And so they have vocalizations like that. They will vocalize and otherwise protect their territory, males will. Um, and they have distress vocalizations. So they do talk, so to speak, and they can hear that. Um, here is one. Also, this is also a Ramsas National Wildlife Refuge that this young gator was walking across the road. Um, so down in the corner, you can see the range map for American alligators, and all the way from North Carolina down through the southeastern states, up through parts of Arkansas, and a good bit of East and South Texas. They really favor coastal marshes and wetlands. Any of you that have been down to the coast, maybe birding to Aransas or to Anahuac, and you can see gators just lounging about on the bank, ignoring the birders. Um, so they're common down along the coast, and they can even tolerate a little bit of salt water. They can do brackish water a little bit. They don't much like it, but they can do it. And then back inland, they follow river systems. So if you're very far from a major river system, you're not going to see an alligator. But along the river systems and floodplains and bottomlands and all that, like up where we are, I mean, there certainly are alligators along the Trinity in Fort Worth and southeast from there. Um, you can find gators if they like kind of slow moving water and muddy or sandy banks. They dig into banks and make gator holes and make kind of dens for overwintering. So if it's a river with muddy or sandy banks and kind of slow water, they slow a little deeper. They like that. The photo at the top is a baby. This was an encounter that Clint and I had. If you're familiar with our first book, Herping Texas, we talk about being in Brazoria along the coast and walking past this mama gator on the boardwalk. And she really didn't care. I mean, she's probably seen a ton of birders. She knows the drill. It's no big deal. The photo of her that you see, the mouth is open, and she was probably panting. That's not a threat deal to have the mouth open like that. She may have been panting on a hot day. And then we started seeing babies, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful, and that's probably why she was hanging around because she's keeping an eye on the babies. What happened is that and of course Clint and I are not well. I won't speak for Clint. No, we're not stupid. We weren't going to take any chances. We didn't get like that close photos taken with a longer lens, so we're not going right up on the baby because Mama would have let us know, right? We kept on walking, and when we came back by, we didn't see Mama. Walked a little further, there she was. She submerged immediately and then came back up right around where the babies were. So she's keeping an eye on us and the babies. And they will sometimes charge people who approach babies and nests too close. So if you're out somewhere in a wetland and you see a big pile of decaying vegetation, a big mound, um, that could be a gator nest, and you should be pretty cautious about that because gators are usually shy and they usually don't care about us, but they have been known to charge people who get near the nest or the babies. Um, I recently did a kind of a 4-page handout thingy about the American alligator at the Lives in Nature website. And it is a free downloadable thing. I talk about all these issues as well as the idea of please don't ever feed alligators. Um, they don't really care much about us. But if we feed them, then they're no longer shy around people. They lose their fear of people, associate us with food, and so they'll start coming up to us. And that becomes a nuisance alligator that may have to either be relocated or even euthanized. So what you see on some Fish and Wildlife signs in wetlands is a fed gator is a dead gator, and that's a useful rule to keep in mind. Please don't feed the alligators. It might be fun, but you're really not doing them any favors at all. The other thing to remember is that alligators, you want to sneak up and get a good photo. The alligator's just sitting there doing nothing, and you think, I'll just get up like within about 3 feet and get a good close photo of the face. Keep in mind that an alligator, once it decides you really are trouble, they can run faster than you can for short distances. They won't run very far, but, and you saw the young one up on all fours. They can get up on all fours like that, and they're fast. So please don't challenge alligators. Parks and Wildlife says stay back about 30 feet. I think that's probably a good rule of thumb. Don't press your luck. So what do they eat? They're very careless naturalists. Just joking about that. They actually don't. There's one record of a fatality in Texas, and that was a guy that apparently there was an alligator in the water, and people warned him, and he said, "I don't care about no alligators," and jumped in the water and was promptly killed. That is the only record. So, it's not like they're a huge danger, but don't swim near them. Don't wade and swim in the water at night when they're active. Don't press your luck. But as far as what they eat, they like fish, turtles, snakes, crawfish, birds, nutria, and even smaller alligators. So they're very opportunistic in what they eat. So any questions about alligators in the chat before we move on and talk about turtles for a bit? If not, then hang on to your thoughts if you have something later, and we'll talk about them. Let's talk about turtles for a little bit. You guys basically know this, sorry, but it's a quick review. They're reptiles. They have no teeth, but they do have sharp beaks. Some of them sharp enough and strong enough to be kind of a nuisance for us. This little Texas map turtle that you see in the photo here couldn't really hurt you much. That's a species where there's a lot of sexual dimorphism, meaning there's size differences or differences based on sex, and the males are smaller and the females are bigger, and the females are a bit more modified for eating crustacean, like snails and stuff. The males a little less so. I wouldn't want to be bitten by a big female map turtle, but this little guy, it would be like no big deal. They have bony shells that are overlaid with scutes. So if you see the map-like, pattern in that shell, that's living fingernail-like tissue over the bone. And we'll talk about the shell a little bit more in a sec. And they lay shelled eggs. So I show this just so you know that it's kind of systematic. It's not sort of random. There's no reason particularly unless if you really like herps, you really like turtles and want to make sure you know about the marginal scutes and the plurals and the vertebrals and all of that, by all means memorize that, but otherwise don't worry too much about it. This is a diagram from a book by Ernst and Lovich, and it shows that the top shell, the carapace, has these specific kinds of scutes around it. And the bottom shell, the plastron, has the scutes that you see to the right, the gular, the humeral, pectoral, abdominal, and so on. And there's a little bit of variation between species, but not a huge amount. Okay, the thing I like to show is what they do with their heads, because I don't know how often people wonder about that, but if you think about turtles, the head's out, maybe really extended far out of the body, and then whoop, disappears back under the shell. How do they do that? I mean, the neck is not an accordion, so how in the world do they do that? There's two groups of turtles in the world. All of ours in North America here are cryptodires, which means their way of hiding the neck is to bend it in an S curve. So in the diagram, which shameless plug of the book, my second book, The Wild Lives of Reptiles and Amphibians, how'd I get that title? Has some diagrams. This one by Jack Jensen is shows the bones of the neck bending in an S curve so that the snapping turtle can pull its neck up under the shell. Um, okay, so what's inside the shell? One of the things that you might not have thought about is that the shoulder bones are inside the rib cage. Now take a moment and think about your own ribs. You could reach around and touch your shoulder blade. It's on the outside of the ribs, isn't it? All right, all of that whole system for your arms, that's on the outside. Um, but with turtles, because the shell is really uh, modified, there's the vertebra, the ribs, and some other bones. That's what makes up the shell. So the hips and shoulders have to be within the rib cage, which is a weird thing. Like how evolution wise, how did they go from on the outside to the inside of the rib cage? And let's talk about breathing for a moment. If you got if you're inside a shell, the breathing cannot involve movement of the rib cage and belly like most animals, right? And so turtles have various sets of muscles that may push the viscera, the excuse me, the internal organs in and up, forcing air out of the lungs, and then pull all the internal organs downward, pulling air in. They can't breathe using the chest or the abdomen. They have to do it that way. Moving the limbs in or out of the shell also helps that. If you ever watch a turtle breathe, you might see the front legs or back legs move a little further out, a little further in, back and forth with the breathing. That's that's related. Um, the third point on there is really it's about aquatic turtles. So if you're in the water, um, well, first, if you're out of the water, gravity will push the viscera down, which tends to open the lungs. But if you're underwater, the water pressure is going to push your internal organs in, and that tends to push air out. So turtles have to do this elaborate dance with how to breathe, right? Because if they're underwater, it works a little different. If they're entirely within the shell, that's really tricky because it leaves almost no room for the lungs to expand. So if the turtle withdraws into the shell protectively, they may get really not very much oxygen for a while. They can do a little bit of breathing, but not as much as usual. And speaking of breathing, let's talk about the exchange of gases. One way is by colloquially butt breathing. We'll talk about that next slide. And or buccopharyngeal breathing. Um, buccopharyngeal simply means your mouth and pharynx. If you've watched a turtle in the water and you see, or anywhere, if you watch it breathe, you might see the neck kind of swell out and go back in rhythmically as it breathes. It's pulling air in to the capillaries that line the edge of the mouth and the pharynx, and you can get some oxygen transfer into the blood through that way. Um, okay, so getting oxygen underwater. Um, they may vary in varying degrees. They might get oxygen by cloacal, which is the butt breathing that I mentioned, or buccopharyngeal breathing, and it varies according to species. There's some that are more reliant on the cloacal breathing. If you see a turtle doing that underwater, what you're going to see is the cloaca, which is the opening at the base of the tail. It opens up pretty much, and water can freely flow in there. And there are even bursae, which are chambers that lead off of the cloaca, which gives more surface area. So it's almost like, the water gets in there and there's a lot of surface area to absorb oxygen. So turtles that rely on that can get a lot of oxygen that way. And then the others, with the way I mentioned a minute ago, through the mouth and throat. So in winter, some turtles dig into the substrate underwater and may spend, now not around here, but in more northern states, they might spend weeks or months submerged, right? And so you wonder, how do they do that? Because they're certainly lung breathing. They got no gills. One way that they do it, let's say if you're a slider turtle in New England, and you are in the mud over the winter for quite a long time, one of the things that you do is greatly reduce your metabolism. So if your rate of your body working, if that slows down really, really slow with just a few beats of your heart per minute, um, you have much less of a need for oxygen. So if you get some oxygen transfer through the cloaca or mouth, then that's helpful. Um, but they also may simply go without oxygen. So how many of you are, well, how many, like you can't raise your hand here, right? But if you may remember anaerobic respiration, right, which is like if you run for a while and you get an oxygen deficit and your muscles start hurting because of the buildup of lactic acid, it hurts, it's painful, it's no good. We're not built for anaerobic respiration, right? Turtles can do a fair amount of that, especially when their metabolism is so slow that they're not having to do it very much. So lactic acid is a byproduct of that respiration, and it even may demineralize some of the shell because calcium will buffer that lactic acid somewhat. So anyway, I know this is sort of nerdy, but that's some of the details of how some of these turtles get through the winter. Now, here they may go into hiding for for cold spells. But here in Texas, you've probably noticed if you take a walk along the river on a warm winter day, all these turtles are out basking, right? So it's not like they have to go under and stay underwater for a real long time. And they're pretty cold tolerant. I have seen red-eared sliders under ice, and there's a published record or two of red-eared sliders moving around very cold water under a thin layer of ice. So they're pretty cold tolerant. Now let's talk about the various groups of turtles, and we'll start with snapping turtles. And we've got a couple of kinds around here. The what used to be called the common snapping turtle, now the accepted common name is just snapping turtle. That's kind of unfortunate because you say snapping turtle and people say what kind. So I'm going to say common snapping turtle. That's the one in the picture. Um, and then there's also the alligator snapping turtle. These are large turtles with knobby tails. You see the long tail out behind this one and large heads. You can see on that snapping turtle a pretty large head and really large feet too. These are just kind of big turtles. If threatened, they can strike very quickly, and you don't want to be bitten by one of these turtles. Here's a common snapper that I had just gotten off the road in Parker County. That turtle was really unhappy with me. What I did is I grabbed it by the back edge of the carapace. In other words, reaching under that top shell, and you can kind of pick it up or sort of wheelbarrow it off the road, so that you're not getting your hands toward the front. You could grab a common snapper at the bridge, which is sort of in the middle there, but you got to be careful. Any further up, they have a long neck and they can reach around, including back over the top of the shell. They can reach around to snap at you, and that would be highly unpleasant. So it's better to do it by the back edge of the shell. Don't do it, please don't do it by picking them up by the tail. You're likely to cause some spinal injury to the turtle doing that. So if you want to get one off the road, do it by the back of the shell if you can. Um, Notice those ponderous legs, man, those front feet, those claws, those are really powerful legs. And if you hold one and they try to kind of scratch and push you away with those legs, it's going to be hard for you to hang on to as well. They're really powerful. So here's a turtle. This is a turtle with a long neck and a really quick strike. And you can see right there, that one's ready for biting, right? Another common snapping turtle. This, on the other hand, is the alligator snapping turtle. They have a shorter neck. And so you can handle these turtles by the middle part of the shell or even reach up under the nuchal part, the part of the shell at the neck, and they can't reach around and bite you. But leave that to people that are trained to do it, because if you do get bitten, it's serious. A common snapper will break the skin and be really painful, and I don't know how much damage beyond that they can do. But bites I have seen are just skin breaks that bleed and they really hurt. There's a published report with the alligator snapping turtle of a near total amputation of a finger. So I know everybody's heard stories about snapping a broomstick in half. That's pushing it. I'm not sure that you don't expect to see that. But if you get bitten on your hand, that could be permanently disfiguring and permanently damaging. So please don't get yourself bitten by an alligator snapper. These used to be considered rare. They spend a lot of time under slow moving, often muddy water in bayous and swamps, and so they're not seen very much. So they're not as rare as we used to think. One other thing while we're talking about them is that little appendage down on the floor of the mouth. If you look at that photo, there's that little pink thing. It looks sort of like a worm. So underwater, that turtle will sit there with the mouth open. Looks like an old log or something, right? A rock or something, with that little wiggling pink thing. And so a crayfish or a fish will come up to investigate, and bang, there's dinner. They'll chomp down on them. So that is basically a fishing lure, is what that is. Um, Here's the bottom side of a juvenile alligator snapping turtle. This one was seen in the big thicket. Steve and I, years ago, Steve pulled this turtle out of the water, and we took some photos and turned it loose. You can see that the plastron, the bottom shell on snapping turtles, is really small. It's sort of plus shaped, right? Not terribly protective, but then they probably don't need a lot of protection, right? You flip one over and you might get bitten. So it doesn't cover much of the bottom of the turtle, just the top. Okay, here's a different group. These are the mud and musk turtles. Mud turtles, the genus Canosternon or Canosternon, and the musk turtles are Sternothrus. Some of them look pretty similar. They're small, semi-aquatic turtles. They stink. Oh my God. And the glands that release the stink are actually at the bridge of the plastron. So I want to point at this. I know you can't see where I'm pointing, right? If you look at the plastron, and the bridge is the connecting strips that connect it to the top shell, right? And there's glands in that area that release this musk, and man, it is nasty. I want to tell you. A lot of these turtles live in ditches, stock tanks, ponds, rivers. They'll eat crayfish and worms and kind of any, insects, any small stuff that they can get hold of. Here is a stink pot. This is the Sternothrus odoratus, and odoratus as the species name. Yep, they got it right. Um, that is a stink pot. Um, a related turtle. It looks pretty similar on top. Is the Mississippi mud turtle. These are also fairly common, and a major difference is when you turn them over, the plastron on the mud turtles is generally a lot larger than the plastron on the musk turtles. And you can see this is a hinged plastron, so they can, to some extent, if they're not too chunky, can pull up and close up within the shell. This is a yellow mud turtle. This is a favorite of mine. I love these guys. I think they're as cute as they can be. I know that, yeah, it's anthropomorphic, so sue me. But they really are cute turtles. They are found further west than some of the others. They really are pretty common in stock tanks. They will dig in during drought, or if the pond dries up. Oftentimes they can dig in and get by till the next rains come. Anyway, yellow mud turtle. And then the razorback musk turtle, you can kind of see where they got the name, right? Has a sort of a peaked shell. It's kind of raised up and narrow there. So that's the razorback musk turtle. This and some of the other photos are courtesy of Texas Turtles and our friends over there, my friend Carl and the rest of the guys at Texas Turtles, and you'll see the website at the end as well. I appreciate the loan of some of these photos. I do not have a photo of a razorback musk turtle. Okay, so there's that group. Now here's the pond turtles and box turtles, the family Imididae. These are all in the same family, and oddly enough include box turtles, even though some are very aquatic and box turtles not so much. Um, so in North Texas, the representatives that we might find are chicken turtles. I'll show you a photo. These are not at all common. You'd be very lucky to see a chicken turtle. Map turtles, which are kind of stick to the rivers, river cooters and Texas cooters, like the ones on the log there in the photo. And then red-eared sliders that we've all seen. We'll talk about those in a sec. The three-toed box turtle and the ornate box turtle. Those are the members of that family in North Texas. So red-eared sliders have shells with those green, a pattern of green and yellow lines, and usually some areas of black like you see in this one. Here's a couple of females to the left. You can see a couple of big females basking. You can see those red patches at the back of the head. That's why they are called red-eared sliders. The ear actually is a little lower. It's near the jawline, so it's not over the ear, but anyway, it's a red patch. And then over in the inset is a melanistic male. That's the one that gets confusing for folks. People see a turtle that kind of looks like a red-eared slider, but it's real dark, almost black. And so they say, what's that? And the especially males that with age, they darken, they get more melanin, more of that pigment in the skin. You can see that one doesn't really have a visible red ear anymore. And it's sort of combination of kind of yellow and olive color and black. And that's a melanistic male red-eared slider. Um, Here's a baby. Where have you seen those before? Those of us that are old enough may have seen them in pet stores, right? They used to sell these all over the place in pet stores. Gosh, I am as guilty as the next person of having my parents buy me at least one, right? That I set up on one of those plastic death ponds, or at least we call them death ponds. It's those little plastic, things with a palm tree in the middle. And we fed them like lettuce and hamburger meat and a diet that's completely inappropriate with no sunlight, and they all die. It was very sad. But here's the reason you don't see them. You shouldn't see them in the pet stores anymore. And if you do see them, you might want to consider reporting them. Turtles and other reptiles can carry salmonella, and they can carry it and be asymptomatic. You don't worry about it as much with like snakes and lizards, but turtles in the pet trade are often kept in miserable, crowded, nasty conditions in water. And that's just a perfect breeding ground for salmonella. And kids were getting these baby turtles and sticking them in their mouths and getting terribly sick. And so the USDA outlawed the sale of any turtle with a carapace length less than 4 inches. Now, some of these, well, I won't call them unscrupulous. They're doing it legally, but I'm not fond of them. The people that sell these in expos and whatever will mark them as being like for research purposes only, for education purposes only. They basically are saying these are not pets. These are being sold to you only for research or education or whatever. But it's nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and we all know. And so hopefully nobody's still getting salmonella, but if they're, you know, if the kids are buying them, then they probably are. Okay, on to the chicken turtle. This turtle is in big trouble, and there's a number of researchers working on these to try to understand them better, understand what is doing them in. Chicken turtles like wet meadows, kind of shallow wetlands, more of an East Texas turtle, and down toward the Gulf. Um, and that's about all I'm going to say about chicken turtles because you're really unlikely to see one. They're really cool have kind of a long neck. I know you can't tell it from that photo, but those are basically endangered. This is an older male river cooter. I know it's a Texas Turtles photo, but I think I remember Carl and me finding that turtle on the edge of the road and Carl taking it with him. Um, it is a male. How can you tell? Look at those front legs, the front. Look at his hands. Look at his fingernails. So those long claws are used in courtship with females. Um, and so an aquatic turtle like that, red ears and cooters, will swim up to a turtle and tickle her nose, her face, with those long claws. That's what they're for. And one way we know this is an older male is that the kind of red reticulated pattern on the shell. That's what happens to some river cooters when they get old. That's the color that you would expect on a really old one. So that's a river cooter. Those are pretty common around here. If you go out to some place like the Fort Worth Nature Center, you will see a combination of river cooters and red-eared sliders. Okay, here's a Mississippi map turtle. One of the things, and you may have the earlier photo of mine, the Texas map, would have been similar to this one, where the eyes are very light colored. You look at those irises; it looks like it has white eyes. That's pretty typical. Um, really cool turtles, and that's the one that I was saying. There's a lot of sexual dimorphism where the females are more adapted for eating mollusks, and the males a slightly different diet. Okay, box turtles. Um, All right, this subject is dear to my heart. I've loved box turtles since I was a kid, and so I'm just kind of obsessed. So bear with me for a moment. This one is a three-toed box turtle. The photo was taken actually in the big thicket, but a male three-toed box turtle would look pretty similar in a lot of different places around Texas. Sometimes the top shell is kind of a plain tan to olive color, or sometimes it has these kind of light markings, dark and with light markings like this one. And and sometimes it's bright enough that it confuses people, make them think it's an ornate box turtle. You have to look at a couple of other things to see which one it is. So one of the things you'll notice that this species has a kind of a high domed carapace, whereas an ornate is more, which I'll show you in a minute, is more flattened. And there's a little ridge. You see the keel along the back there is typical of a three-toed box turtle. And the males get these, to some extent females, but the males especially, get these really brightly colored heads. They're just gorgeous turtles. Okay, here's the one that we saw at Sheri Capehart. Now, Sheri Capehart is about 59 acres. Um, I think I may have in the slide somewhere 52 acres. The city changes the exact number a little bit, but anyways, 50 something acres. That's not real big, but it's big enough for two or three box turtles. But there are almost no observations documented. If you look at INAT, there's maybe, other than my documentation of this one or two others in the history of the preserve, and it's interesting to wonder why. And one reason is that they tend to be kind of camouflaged, right? And they don't really hang out on the trails so much. So if you're away from the trail and you're not moving around very much, you could get overlooked pretty easily. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But I was just delighted to see this turtle. Um, so box turtles are in decline in most areas. And that was one of the reasons I was delighted to see this turtle, is because, like, oh, here is one in an urban area where you would think most box turtles have disappeared. They will occasionally turn up, sometimes as escaped pets, or every once in a while, it's one that's still hanging on in kind of an urban area, and then it turns up somewhere. But they are in decline. Here's the really cool thing about her. Well, after I took that photo, she set out swimming across the pond in a straight line about 100 feet, which is weird for box turtles. I don't usually, there are some observations of this, but it's unusual. They will soak in water. They like water. But they don't usually swim in open water. But she swam in a straight line like she knew where she was going, and she probably did. Our best guess, and I talked with the Texas Turtles. I talked with Viviana and the others at Texas Turtles, and our best guess is that she may be a turtle that has hung out all these years, managed to not be collected by someone, killed by a dog, or run over on the street. Um, and so she probably knows the area well. So she got spotted and said, "Yep, I'm getting out of here," and headed across the pond. So here's an ornate box turtle. Obviously a really different looking turtle, right? This is the characteristic black or very dark brown shell with the yellow radiating lines. That's characteristic of an ornate box turtle. And this is a male. And the thing that's really characteristic about an old male ornate box turtle is the green head with a red eye. That's pretty typical. So this old guy um, was I was really glad to get this photo of this guy. Here's a female. So in contrast, the female has more kind of brown and yellow color, kind of like the shell on her head, and a kind of a brown eye. Um, so that's a female. She's eating a grape. I actually set up this photo by putting a grape there for her to eat, so she would stop for a minute. So that's what she's eating there. Here's the bottom of an ornate box turtle, and it's one of the ways if you're uncertain, if you see a turtle, a box turtle, and you're not certain if it's an ornate or not. um, Ornates continue that same very dark with yellow lines, that same theme on the plastron, whereas a three-toed, and well, you'll see that in a minute. So one of the things I'm showing in this photo is, and just to orient yourself, the head is to the right, the turtle's upside down, so you're looking at the bottom shell. You can see the back foot kind of in the lower part of the left part of the photo. So one arrow is showing the hinge for the plastron. It's hinged, and the turtle can close up inside the shell by pulling the two lobes together. And so instead of a rigid bridge, the connection is by tough, flexible tissue. So they can bend those lobes of the shell. Here's a three-toed box turtle. And this was like picked up right off the road. I picked it up, took the photos, and turned it loose. So I do not collect box turtles. Again, they are in trouble, and everyone taken out of the wild, it does damage. So I never collect box turtles. Anyway, I picked this one up partly to illustrate. This one's completely closed up. This is a very shy box turtle, completely closed itself up. And you can see this one's a male. And how I know is that little shallow concave spot in the plastron. You can see it if you look at it. It looks like it's sort of depressed inward a little bit, right? Well, think about breeding. I mean, I don't want to talk about sex or nothing, but let's talk about breeding for just a second in box turtles. They're high-domed turtles, and the male has to mount that female, and it's extremely. If you see it, it's quite awkward. And actually, the male has to kind of climb up over the female's shell in the first part of copulation, and if you have a depression in that plastron, a little concave shape, it helps mold to the female a little better, helps just a little bit, makes it a little less awkward when breeding. Okay, I'm gonna, well, if any of you are curious, we might come back to box turtles and their conservation issues in a little bit. I've got another slide on that later, I think. For now, let's talk about softshell turtles. These are really cool turtles, really very different. Every once in a while, somebody will call them pancake turtles, and that's because they're very flat and with a rubbery shell. They have long necks. They can reach around and bite you, and no, you don't want that to happen. It's uh, pretty strong bite. They have a snorkel-like nose. If you can see to the right there, in the photo. It looks like a snorkel. So that guy can shimmy down into sand or gravel and wait for something to come by to eat. And if it needs a breath, if it's in shallow water, it can just extend its head and neck up several inches to get a breath of air and then come back down. Um, we have two species in our area. One of them is the smooth softshell, and the other is the spiny softshell. The spiny is much more common. This one is a juvenile, by the way. So here's a big female spiny. You notice that, first of all, she's big. She's like serving dish size. You may not be able to tell quite from the photo, but she's a big old gal. The top shell can be like a couple of, roughly 2 feet long. They can be very big. Um, they're called spiny soft shells because if you look that edge of the shell near the neck, there's some sort of nodular spines there that you wouldn't see with a smooth. Also, the males and younger ones have some spines elsewhere on the shell too, but those you can see. Also, spinies have a small ridge. Here we're getting into detailed stuff, right? Nerd stuff again. But if you want to know a spiny versus a smooth soft shell, look them in the nose. So if you look in those nostrils, there's a little ridge along the medial septum. In other words, in the middle there, within the nostrils, a little kind of flat ridge. That's a spiny soft shell thing. It is not a smooth soft shell thing. Okay, here's a smooth soft shell, a photo by my friend Megan. And one of the things I really like about this photo is that it's in relatively clear water. It looks like it's flying. These are just really gorgeous turtles, especially in the water like that. So these are pretty uncommon. The smooth species is pretty uncommon, but it's recorded in several river systems in Texas, including around here. We could be in the range for both smooth and spiny. All right, let's talk about baby turtles, male and female. Remember we talked about this with alligators. So turtles don't have sex chromosomes. Instead, the incubation temperature triggers development as either male or female. And there's a couple of patterns. Don't worry about remembering these patterns particularly. Um, Pattern one's pretty common though, and that is lower incubation temperatures result in males, and higher ones result in females. The mud and musk turtles have a little different pattern where there's an intermediate version and then the either extreme, and then a third pattern is kind of like that. But pattern one's the common one. So with climate change, um, with our increasing temperatures, uh, basically more than 4 degrees Celsius might eliminate males. And of course, if you eliminate males, then you're just not going to get reproduction and they will die off. Even increases less than 2 degrees Celsius would greatly decrease the percentage of males. And few to no males means little or no reproduction. By the way, 2 degrees Celsius is about the same as 3.6 Fahrenheit. And even fairly optimistic estimates of our climate catastrophe show temperatures increasing that much within this century. I don't know what will happen. I don't know if the turtles will do a workaround, if it'll be one of those, pardon the quote from Jurassic Park, but like life will find a way, some sort of, quick evolutionary piece, or I don't know what will happen. But right now it looks like they're in trouble from climate change. Okay, let's talk about what it means to have long lives and low reproduction. Turtles take a long time to mature. This is a baby box turtle on the right, by the way, baby three-toed box turtle. So they take a long time to mature. I mean, for a box turtle, five plus years for maturity, most of them lay relatively few eggs. And most of those turtle nests are raided by predators. Looking at you, raccoons, but other things too will raid nests. They love them and will eat those eggs scrambled or poached or otherwise. Baby turtles are easy prey for other animals. I knew a guy that was working on trying to repopulate box turtles near Tyler, and he gave up that project saying that releasing baby turtles, baby box turtles, was just feeding crows, is all it was. So they're easy prey for other animals. And so, therefore, the recruitment into adult populations is low. Okay, not a lot of eggs, not a lot of them survive. Takes a long time. There's not much recruitment into the adult population. And so turtles compensate for that pattern by living a long time and keeping on laying eggs. So they don't seem to like there's no menopause or anything like that. These turtles are reproductively capable throughout their lives. You've heard that box turtles can live, and it's kind of talking about turtles in general, but in particular box turtles here. You've heard about them living 100 years. That's more the exception. They can do it, but the average rates, I can't remember for three-toed and eastern, but I know for ornates, I think it's 30, 40 years. Wouldn't be unusual at all. They live a long time. So every adult killed or collected, everyone run over on the road, or everyone that we pick up as a pet hurts the population. In other words, turtle survival depends on turtles living a long time. Um, and historically, they did. Not very many adults died every year, but more people, more development, so there's more roads, and that means greater loss of adult turtles. Road mortality is a big part of it. Habitat loss is also a big part of it. Collecting used to be. I'm proud to say I was part of a group that helped work on banning um, turtle collection from the wild years ago. Parks and Wildlife now makes that illegal. We worked on it with box turtles, and they made it sort of generally for turtles, uh, with a couple of exceptions: red-eared sliders, snappers, soft shells, I believe. Um, but for the most part, you can't legally collect turtles from the wild. So there's not much, and I'm not saying people don't still do it, but there's not much collection of box turtles from the wild in Texas anymore. So that helps. But they still get run over on the road. They still lose habitat. They're still in a lot of trouble. And so what happens when the rate of loss exceeds the rate of recruitment? Obviously, you know what happens. We lose them. And that's why at the beginning of this, we were talking about, yeah, we don't hardly see box turtles anymore. Out near the big thicket, they're a little more common. There's more areas of better habitat. Up near the Red River and some of that area, it's pretty good. Parts of East Texas. Um, but in a lot of places, you're just not really going to see them. And nowhere will you see them like you saw when I was a kid. Okay, so for more information about turtles, um, one of the books, the Ernst and Lovich book, uh, and that is Turtles of the United States and Canada. It's a big book, and it's like from Princeton or something, or no, Johns Hopkins. It's a little pricey, but if you find it in the library, if you have access to that, it has tons of natural history information. It is like the Bible of turtles of the United States and Canada. So that's a really excellent book. There are other good books about turtles. Um, One of them is if you like box turtles anywhere near as much as I do, you might want to pick up the book by C. Kenneth Dodd called North American Box Turtles: A Natural History, and that is a wonderful book about box turtles. Um, and I mean, there are accounts of the different species, and there are accounts of things like the thing about how you can't really relocate them. A lot of you have heard this. It's not like you can take a box turtle and turn it loose somewhere else to try to get box turtles back where we've lost them, because box turtles, they know they stay in a home range. That home range is usually pretty small, and you hear people talk, like sometimes on Facebook. You guys don't get your information from Facebook, though, do you? God, I hope not. But at any rate, you'll see stuff like, they live in a very small, like smaller than a football field area, and if you move them, they invariably die, every single one of them. It's not quite like that, but their home ranges are maybe 5 to 7 acres. It varies. Some of them a little smaller, some a little bigger, but 5 to 7 acres is about where a lot of them stay, and they know all the landmarks. They've walked that area. They know where their stuff is. So if you move them, they know they're lost. They know they're not home. And box turtles have a certain amount of homing ability. It turns out they have a kind of an internal clock, which they use in combination with the position of the sun. It's something that they call the sun compass. The turtles don't, but researchers do. They can get a general sort of orientation about where they are relative to where they're supposed to be, and they will very often set off to try to find home. And in the process of doing that, they will cross areas that are dangerous. They'll cross roads and get run over. They will be so involved in trying to get back home that they don't take care of themselves. It can be a death sentence. It's not inevitably. There are some that will settle down, but it's common enough. It's the usual thing that they'll wander. That it is not an acceptable conservation strategy to just take a basket full of box turtles out and turn them loose somewhere. Um, I'm certainly guilty when I was a kid. I mean, I really when I was a kid, like my parents were driving, and we'd see a box turtle and stop for it on an interstate, right? And I would pick up that turtle and run it up the farm road somewhere a mile or so, where it was away from all the traffic and they wouldn't get run over. Because, you would see after a rain, I mean, you would see like a dozen turtles and you would see five or six of them run over and dead. It was really distressing. So I thought I was doing them a big favor, but I wasn't doing them a big favor at all. They can usually find their way home from I think about a kilometer, and I'm not sure about that. Don't quote me on that. But from a certain distance, they'll probably find their way home. But if not, if it's too far away, they simply may not survive. And there's all kinds of dark stories like this. I'm sorry to be like a bummer, but if you read this, and I encourage you to do it, anybody that's interested in conservation, the article that I list there, Levitch, Ennen, Aga, and Gibbons, Where Have All the Turtles Gone and Why Does It Matter, is a wonderful article and talks about their declines, talks about why it matters in terms of their ecosystem services. Like why does turtles matter? Who cares? What good do they do to the ecosystem around them? And there's a lot of information there. Okay, also, let's see. Um, the Hibbits and Hibbits Texas Turtles and Crocodilians Field Guide, and I'm going to stop sharing for just a second to show you a couple of books. And this one is the Hibbits and Hibbits Guide. I mentioned one of this series last time. It's a shame that I promote these field guides where you have to buy like 4 or 5 books in order to have a set on the herps. But the deal is they're relatively thorough and well done. And this one includes the American alligator and includes all of our turtles in Texas. And so if you wanted a field guide, that's a good one. Yeah, I know there's INAT, but what if you just want to see what is a chicken turtle like? I mean, you could search it on INAT and find it, or you could do a search, but you'll get more natural history stuff pulled together in a field guide. So anyway, I'm old fashioned. I like books. Speaking of old fashioned and like books, this is just I don't want to say for fun. This is this guy wrote about spotted turtles and snapping turtles and all up in New Hampshire, as I recall. So this is a book about turtles in New England, but this is just a beautifully written natural history where this guy walked around during the entire year and chronicles their movements and what they do and how they live. And it's written almost like poetry. So, and I think it may still be out of print, but if you can find The Year of the Turtle, gosh, that's a cool book. A guy named David Carroll. That's the book. Let me go back to, well, let's see. While we're away from the presentation, let me look at the chat for a sec. Uh, Yeah, cool about the neck. Yeah. The other turtles, Denise, are in the old world and in South America are called side neck turtles, and they bend their necks to the side. And yeah, you remember those pet turtles. Boy, what a dark day, right? But they were when we were kids that we loved them, right? Are there current conservation efforts for box turtles? And yes, there are. And I have lost track, to tell you the truth. There used to be a group that would meet yearly on box turtle efforts in Patuxent Wildlife Refuge in Maryland, I think. It was a good conference. So there are large scale efforts like that. There are also local efforts like at Lila. If everybody's familiar with the Lila, the Louisville Lake Environmental Learning Area, they have a project, and the guy that takes care of some of these turtles, Hugh. I'll think of his last name in a minute. Hugh takes care of these turtles, and they captive breed native box turtles for release. They're trying to basically repatriate the area within Lila with box turtles. Now, I said earlier that releasing baby box turtles was like, yeah, thank you, Sharon, Hugh Franks. Releasing baby box turtles are like feeding crows. So how do they get around that? What they do is they head start them. And in the conservation presentation, in a couple of presentations from now, I'm going to get into that in some detail about various methods. But at any rate, they head start them, which means that they keep them captive in a pen there on site and feed them and grow them up to where the shell's a little harder, they're a little bigger, um, a little lower mortality probably before releasing them. So, the problem with the adults is if you release them, generally they came from somewhere else and they wander off. The problem with the babies is they all get eaten. So in the middle, sometimes maybe you can do a decent effort with that. I don't want to encourage anybody. I mean, even as a local master naturalist effort, these things need to be driven by um, a little bit more specialized knowledge. And to me, it's a little bit like the efforts with horned lizards, where there are some good efforts going on, but there's a lot of things that need to be taken into account. So I would encourage none of us, like I would not just take it upon myself to breed some box turtles and grow them up a little and release them, because there's all kinds of ways for that to go wrong. One of the ways, well, we'll get back to that in a second. Jan says, more bummer in north central Texas. Many other areas across the U.S. weren't turtles often hunted and eaten by indigenous people. And yes, that is true. Was any population surge in the 1800s offset by loss of habitat? So the indigenous stuff um, is, that is not at a scale that I would worry about hurting turtles. And I don't know how much of it. I mean, there's indigenous people living all around us, of course. It's a much smaller number of indigenous people that are looking to really keep cultural stuff alive. For example, one of the things that some Eastern nations used to do is to hollow out box turtle shells and stick stuff in them and use them as shakers, rattles in rituals and ceremonies. Um, and if a group of indigenous people wanted to do that with a couple of box turtles here in Texas as part of their keeping their culture going, that wouldn't do any conservation damage. I mean, yeah, it sucks for the turtles, but it's not the kind of numbers that would have an effect. Um, but and I don't know how much. Yeah, I don't know how much box turtles were eaten by white folks. There certainly, and um, Louisiana was a huge turtle market, and still is. Louisiana is part of the problem with alligator snapping turtles. Texas protects its alligator snapping turtles. Louisiana does not. And there is a problem with people coming over from Louisiana and poaching alligator snapping turtles for food. Um, so there is among the rest of us, the settler white folks population, an issue of the rate at which we eat turtles. I don't know that the consumption in the U.S. even that is at a scale that affects turtles too much. The biggest thing, and this was one of the reasons I was so glad to see the Texas ban go into place, is that thousands and thousands of freshwater turtles were exported through airports to Asia because of the degree to which they're popular food items in parts of Asia, and also significant in traditional medicine, folk medicine kind of stuff in Asia. And so the trade exporting to Asia was huge and horrendous. And that uh, is hopefully at least been slowed down. I don't know how much poaching goes on. Poaching of reptiles is a big deal. We don't have time to go into that, um, but hopefully at least much less so than it used to be, 10 or 15 years ago. Okay, so you turn me loose. I go on and on about these things, and let's go back to the presentation for just a second. Let me find it. Um, okay, so it seems like I was going to go back to one of these here. I was going to go this way. We've covered that stuff. Let's just open this for questions. I'm going to go to this slide here with this happy little three-toed box turtle giving us a smile over her shoulder. And of course, if any of you are interested, the books that I wrote, one of them is co-authored by Clint King, Herping Texas, is talks about about 10 years of us traveling all around Texas. Each of the ecoregions is represented, finding reptiles and amphibians and writing about their natural history. Um, and then the wildlives of reptiles and amphibians, that book, sorry, yeah, okay, that sharing window has been closed. Anyway, um, the wild lives of reptiles and amphibians is subtitled "A Young Herpetologist's Guide" because A&M was kind of interested in a book for like middle school and up, and so I wrote it with that in mind. It is not a children's book, but it's accessible by teenagers that like to read and by adults. It's not heavily detailed, but it does do a lot of it's organized. Well, the first part of it is a little different, but and covers some issues. But then it's organized by habitat type. So I wrote about it like at the creek and in the woodland and on the prairie, and picked several representative species to talk about, to write about their natural history. How do they live? All of that. So if you think that kind of book would appeal to you, well, go for it. So Denise is asking, when is the next one? The next one is in 2 weeks, and let me. Oh, thanks, Jan. June 11. Now, June 11 will be near and dear to my heart because while I love all herps, and I hopefully am giving you somewhat in-depth, helpful information on each of these groups, the lizards and snakes, and especially the snakes, that is the deal for me. I'm a huge snake nut. And I also want to include some discussion of snakebite first aid, not because it's that common. Snakebite is not terribly common, but there's a lot of misinformation out there about snakebite first aid, and I've studied that area, and so we can talk about what to do if you're bitten by a venomous snake, um, what might happen at the hospital, and how you can advocate for yourself. So that'll I expect that will run a couple of hours. Um, so. Yeah, Erica, thanks. I hope you'll be here. That is the next one, June 11. Lots of snakes. We'll hit each of our local venomous snakes. I'll cover every one of those species and include samples of other um, harmless species as well, and lizards too. We'll talk about lizards as well. So Any other questions though about turtles or alligators? You can see alligators at occasionally at Fort Worth Nature Center, and I think probably at uh, oh, so I'm blocking on the name, John Bunker Sands. Basically, places along the Trinity, there's you have a shot at seeing gators. Uh, so I
Hey,
appreciate.
Mike.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna throw out there, if anybody is a, master naturalist, the Fort Worth Nature Center is doing alligator nest surveying
Hmm.
next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Um, they're not opening it to the general public, so you've got to be, kind of in the crowd, to be able to be there. But if anybody's interested, and did not get the info, I can put my email in the chat, and I can forward you the info and the sign up link. It should be pretty cool. It's going to be my first time doing it, so I'll be out there Wednesday. And I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, that's happening at the Nature Center Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and I guess they run until about midnight.
Yeah.
So it's a long night. There's a lot of instructions.
Yeah.
Um, so but if anybody's interested in getting out there with the alligators, it's a great opportunity to do that.
I'm really glad you brought that up, and I have to second that. That would be a really valuable opportunity. Jared, the current director, was an alligator researcher in Southeast Oklahoma before coming here. Jared knows his stuff, and it's a very professional team. They'll take care of you. I mean, they will try and make sure that you don't put yourself in any harm's way, and they're not going to have you do stuff that would be dangerous to you, but in helping spot them, I'm sure, and just being there to help, maybe record measurements if they get some. I don't. I'm not real knowledgeable about what they're going to do, but I know the people involved, and I know it's bound to be a really cool event.
Yep.
Jared is doing lots of good research on. They're working on studying the nesting habits of females out there. There's an alligator population big enough that they can study, nesting and growth and various kinds of things about the alligators there.
Yeah, but my email's in the chat. If
Yeah,
anybody wants info, um, just email me and I can forward you the email with the sign up link and all the
yeah.
instructions from Jared. So I'm looking forward to it. So can't wait to get out there and see what it's all about.
Thanks very much. And I got to mention again that you guys, as the Crosstimbers chapter of the Master Naturalists, co-sponsor this. I really appreciate your interest in and support of this series of talks, along with the Friends of Sheri Capehart Nature Preserve. I really appreciate the Friends' support on this as well. This is I enjoy teaching incoming master naturalists, and I always wanted to do something more involved. I've done this series of talks in person with some field stuff before, and that's a lot of fun, but that's just delightful to be able to talk about all this stuff with you. And, it's a trade-off to do it on Zoom versus in person, um, because in person, we can talk back and forth more and have more questions and then get out in the field together and try some stuff. But and every time we've gotten together, I've taught this at the Forward Nature Center, and we've seen an alligator. I think every time that we've gone out in the field on this series. Anyway, I love talking about this stuff. I really appreciate you guys being here, and I hope to see you next time.
Thank you for doing this.
Sure.
Thank you.
You bet. My pleasure.